Good afternoon and welcome to my show, Justice Matters. As many of you know, my name is Patty Corrales and I was a former senior attorney for ICE, and I have the pleasure today to have with me an outstanding advocate in the community and a phenomenal lawyer. His name is Michael Kaufman, and Michael is with the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU. And Michael is here on my show and we're going to discuss the driver's license law, AB 60, and give accurate information as to what AB 60 is all about, who's eligible, what are the restrictions, what are the requirements, and we're going to have a lively discussion today. So I hope all of you join us, and if you know any members of your family or community that might benefit from this information, please let them know about this show. And right now I'm going to introduce Michael. Michael, thank you for coming on my show. I appreciate you being here with us, and if you could please introduce yourself to the community.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Patty. My name is Michael Kaufman. I'm an attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union, as you mentioned, in Los Angeles. I do a variety of immigrants' rights work, and our office has been heavily involved in getting the AB 60 law passed, and now we're doing our best to make sure the community is educated and knows what they need to do to take advantage of the new licenses.
Well, and I want to talk about that because it's really important for our community, especially the immigrant community, to understand the requirements for AB 60 so that they are not taken advantage by notaries or immigration consultants or even lawyers sometimes. So let's talk a little bit about first, what is AB 60? What is that?
So AB 60 is a law that was passed by the California legislature last year, and what it does is enable people to obtain a driver's license in California regardless of their immigration status. So for about the past 2 decades, if you're undocumented here in California, you've been ineligible to apply for a driver's license. That means every time you would go to drive your kids to work, drive your kids to school, go to work, go to the grocery store, whatever you need to do to get about in your daily life, you risk being pulled over by the police, getting a ticket for driving without a license, and in many cases people would get their cars impounded for up to 30 days, which can be enormously expensive for many people, and they had to give up their vehicles. So this bill, which was passed last year, is really a tremendous step forward for the immigrant community here in California, and really all of us who for the past couple decades have seen law enforcement resources wasted on needlessly attacking and targeting immigrant community members for doing nothing more than going to work or taking their kids to school.
I agree with you. It's incredible how much money and resources go to going after someone for a ticket for not having a driver's license. Now, AB 60 becomes effective January 1st of 2015, but can people at this time go and start getting applications for their driver's license and making appointments with the DMV or the local DMV to take the test?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So under AB 60, the licenses are required to be made available beginning in January of 2015, just a few weeks from now. However, the DMV is now accepting appointments for people to begin the process of getting a driver's license. The first step in that process, and we can talk through it in a little more detail, is making an appointment with the DMV to come in and fill out your application for a driver's license and take the written portion of the driving test, essentially an exam on the rules and laws governing driving here in California. You can make that appointment up to 90 days in advance of when you want to come in. So we encourage people now, if they're ready and want to take advantage of the driver's license, to go ahead and contact the DMV, make an appointment to come in beginning in January or whenever it's convenient for you. But there's a couple other things people should start beginning to do to prepare themselves to take the application and get the driver's license, aside from making an appointment. 2 things that are very important. One is you're going to have to gather some documents together to establish both your identity and your California residency to the DMV's satisfaction. And there are detailed requirements about what documents will satisfy the DMV to establish your identity and to establish your California residency. And we can talk through those in a little more detail.
Okay.
But folks should begin now the process of getting any identification documents they have, like a foreign passport, a birth certificate, a consular ID like a matricula, any documents at all they can think of that show essentially that they are who they say they are, that has a picture or other identifying information about them. For establishing your California residency, it can be as easy as bringing in a rental agreement that lists you as the person who's renting a residence here in California. Any bills you have, cell phone bills, bank statements, even the bills that go, let's say, to your spouse. If you can prove you're married to your spouse and your spouse lives here in California, those can help to establish that you're resident here in California. But that process can take a while sometimes, particularly if you have to go to the consulate to get documents. It can take weeks or months for the consulates to process those requests. And given the overwhelming demand we expect for these new driver's licenses, and also that the president recently announced his executive action allowing certain immigrants to qualify for deferred action, I think a lot of people are going to be going to the consulate to ask for these type of documents, and they're going to be kind of overwhelmed with requests.
So start doing
it now. Start doing the things.
And let me talk to you and stop you right here. You brought up an excellent issue, and that is they have to start making they can go to the DMV and start requesting an appointment to fill out the application. Can they download the application from the DMV website? Do they have to go to a notary? Do they have to go to a lawyer to do this?
No, all the materials you need to get an AB60 license are available through the DMV or through organizations that are making free of charge to the community resources available to get the applications and the educational materials you'll need. The law, in fact, AB60 prohibits anybody for charging somebody for filling out an application. And that's because the DMV set up the application in a way that it could be done by ordinary people, maybe with the help of a family member, to fill out the application and study in the materials they'll need to pass the driving test. No one should be approaching anybody to solicit money to help them through the AB60 process. So if you hear of somebody saying, hey, I know somebody at the DMV, or I know some way to get your application processed quicker, or I know this other place besides the DMV where you can go to get a license, that's going to be somebody who's essentially doing a scam. That's illegal. If you hear about that, you should report it to the authorities. You can also report it to organizations like ours. The Drive California Coalition is a group of organizations, including the ACLU, that are helping educate the community about AB60 and monitoring implementation. We want to know if those types of scams are ongoing, preying on the immigrant community, as we've seen in times past, like through notarios and other types of fraud.
Well, you know, Michael, the ACLU has always been so actively involved in protecting the immigrants' rights. So it's something that we hope that we appreciate you being here on behalf of the ACLU to make certain that people understand that there is no need to go to a lawyer, that these are really quite self-explanatory applications, and the DMV will have the information also in Spanish for the Spanish-speaking community, for those who can't speak or write in English. I know that I've seen booklets in Spanish that talk about AB60 and the requirements, and also the application and the test questions that might be on the test itself. Talking about that, I'm going to stop right here for a second and just explain for our community in the Spanish-speaking community a little bit of what you said in Spanish. Lo que dijo el abogado del ACLU es que no tienen que pagar a ningún abogado, a ningún consultante, a ningún notario por llenar la aplicación para las nuevas licencias que empieza el 1 de enero de 2015. Ahora, se puede ir al website del DMV y sacar por medio de la computadora las aplicaciones y empezar a llenarlos. Tienes que llenar esas aplicaciones con la verdad, pero son muy fáciles para llenar. Como dijo el abogado del ACLU, no tienen que pagar a nadie. Y si alguien quiere cobrarte dinero por eso, tienes que reportar primeramente, eso es ilegal, y tienes que reportar esa actividad a las autoridades. Michael, now you talked about identification and residence. So do they have to put a packet together, or how does that work?
So when you go in to fill out the application at the DMV, they're going to request certain documents to establish those two key points, your identity and your California residence. And there's a list available on the DMV website and through the Drive California Coalition website that will tell folks exactly what documents the DMV will accept. So generally speaking, a foreign passport plus one other form of identification like a birth certificate or a consular ID will suffice. If you're from Mexico, actually, just the consular ID alone or your Mexican passport, if it's currently valid, is good enough for DMV purposes. but I encourage people to consult the website or go to the DMV to clarify. So when you go in to fill out your application, you want to just be sure to bring an original of those documents, or if you have copies, bring them in. And the DMV official who's reviewing your application will take a look at those documents to ensure that they meet the requirements. Now, let's say you don't have one of those documents with you here in the United States that the DMV is requesting. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't get a driver's license. The DMV set up what's known as a secondary review process for people in just those circumstances. And for those folks, they should just bring in whatever documents they can find, school ID, any documents about their children, let's say that establish their children's identity and their relationship to their children. Anything they can find, bring together, and the DMV will take a look at the totality of documents you have to see if they're all together or sufficient to establish your identity. So again, it's not make or break if you don't happen to have one of the documents that's on the list. People should pull together whatever they can and then take it to the DMV and see if that's sufficient for the DMV.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Now, I've had many clients come to my office and ask me, well, if I apply for this new driver's license, will my driver's license look different from, let's say, someone who has a driver's license through deferred action or who is a lawful permanent resident? Will these driver's licenses be different, and will they signify that the individual who has this license is here unlawfully?
This is a really important question. So yes, the driver's licenses will look different. However, we fought very hard, and the California legislature agreed that we should make those markings that distinguish this AB60 license from an ordinary driver's license as small and inconspicuous as possible, because we don't want people to be discriminated against by virtue of the fact that they have this license. So the driver's license itself will look almost identical to an ordinary driver's license, except in the top right corner, there'll appear language that says, not valid for certain federal purposes. And the back of the driver's license will have text that essentially says the same thing. That's the only difference you'll see between an AB60 license and an original driver's license. Additionally, built into the language of AB60 are provisions of law that prohibit law enforcement agencies or any state or local official from discriminating against somebody who has that driver's license. So let's say you're pulled over or stopped by the police for whatever reason, unrelated to your driving, and they ask for a form of identification. They can't treat you worse or differently than somebody who has a regular driver's license because of the fact that you have that AB60 license.
And if they do, report it.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that we at the ACLU are going to be closely monitoring, and we really encourage people to step forward. If they know themselves or have a family member or friend that's happened to, please let us know, and we'll do our best to make sure that the situation is fixed and that kind of discriminatory behavior is put to a stop.
And you know, I want to touch on something you just said, and I certainly can create an entire show on this, and that is if the police stop you just randomly and ask for your identification, unless there's a reason to ask you for identification, they have no right to ask you for identification. So that's a separate and distinct show. We can talk about that for hours, but that's also problematic. Now, in regards to what can this driver's license be used for? Can you talk a little bit about that? Can they use this driver's license to get work?
Yeah. So there's two things that the driver's license is going to allow you to do. One is to allow you to drive in California, and the same extent that anybody else who has a driver's license. The second thing we do, which we were just talking about, is it serves as a valid form of identification for state and local officials here in California. However, there are some important limits on what you can do with a driver's license. You can't, of course, it's not equivalent to a work authorization. So if you aren't already work authorized, this driver's license won't allow you to work based on it alone. Additionally, the driver's license is not valid for federal identification purposes. So that means when you come into contact with a federal official, if you give them that driver's license, they're not going to say that as a valid form of ID. They're not going to accept it. So let's say if you try to board a plane, there you have to go through security that's run by the federal government, the TSA administration. The TSA is not going to accept that as a valid form of identification. And indeed, we don't encourage people to offer the ID in those circumstances. Same thing if you're going to, let's say, a federal court building or a federal agency. In those circumstances, they're not going to accept the AB60 license as a valid form of identification.
All right, so can't use it to travel.
On a plane.
On a plane. Certainly can't use it if you're asked by a federal police officer to identify who you are. That's not going to be a valid identification. What can the driver's license do other than just allow you to drive in the United States legally?
Well, the key thing is it will allow you to drive in California, and that much is clear. Now, each state has their own licensed driving laws. Generally, other states respect that if you have a license from a different state, they'll accept that license as a valid form to drive. So let's say you're taking a vacation, you drive into Nevada or Arizona. Generally, other states will accept it. However, we are noting some caution with this, that because of the marking on the license, it is possible that people, if they enter into a different state, like Arizona, that may have less immigrant-friendly policies and officials there, that it could be used, if you hand it over to a police officer, as an opportunity for them to try to discriminate against you, treat you worse, detain you, whatever it may be, as a result of you having that marked license. So we would just urge some caution if people attempt to use the driver's license in other states or with law enforcement officials from other states. It's sort of a case-by-case.
Excellent point. And talking about that, I've also had clients come to me and say, well, you know, I have my driver's license under deferred action, or my parents are about to be eligible for this new deferred action that the President announced on November 20th, which we know as DAPA, or Deferred Action for Parents of who have U.S. citizens, children, or lawful permanent residents, children here in the United States. Should they wait? Should they wait for that license? Is that license better, if you will, than the license under AB 60? What do you think?
So we expect that under the President's new initiative, when an adult is granted deferred action under DAPA, that they'll then be eligible for an original California, the basic California driver's license, not the AB 60 license. That was the case with DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. People who qualified under DACA are able to get an original California driver's license. So we expect it'll be the same treatment. However, that process to apply for deferred action may take months. The President hasn't even really announced exactly how the system is going to work. We don't know what the application is going to look like. We don't know what the processing times are going to look like. So people are looking at months at a minimum while they submit those applications, waiting for their application to be approved, where they risk driving around or being in California without a driver's license. And for those people, it may make sense for them in the interim to apply for an AB 60 license. The fees are pretty low. It's only $33, the same fee it would be to get a regular California driver's license. And that way you have that license in your pocket as a form of protection while you're driving to make sure that you're lawfully licensed to travel, and as a form of identification if you come into contact with state and local officials. But if folks want to wait, let's say, apply for deferred action, wait till they have the grant in hand, then they can go back to the DMV and get a regular driver's license, one that won't have that marking. I think it's sort of a personal decision that each person should make.
I agree. It's a personal decision, but I think it makes so much sense that if you can obtain this AB 60 license and while you wait for your application to process, to do so, because you avoid tickets and you avoid fines. And let's talk about tickets and fines. Would someone be eligible for the AB 60 license if, let's say, they have an outstanding fine for a violation for not stopping at the stop sign? How about a DUI?
That's right, that's right. So this is important. The DMV is going to check when you submit your application whether you have any outstanding traffic fines that you haven't paid. And if that's the case, they're not going to issue the license till you set up and pay your fines. So people who are applying should think carefully about whether they've paid off all of their outstanding fines. Additionally, if you are due to pay child support payments and you're late on them, the DMV is also going to check that. And if you haven't paid your child support, they're not going to give you a driver's license. So that's another set of things people should be sure that their payments are up to date to ensure that they can get those driver's license when they go and apply.
What if someone has a driver's license? Excuse me, let me ask you a different question. Let's say someone has a DUI. Would they be eligible to apply for an AB 60 license, and they obtained that DUI conviction when they didn't have a license? Are they now eligible?
It depends. So depending on the type of DUI conviction you had and when it occurred, you may be barred from getting a license for some period of time. And so you may have to wait for that time period to run until you're eligible again to apply for any form of license, including the AB 60 license. Additionally, if you still have some fines outstanding, again, they're not going to give you your license till you set up and pay those fines. For somebody who has a DUI, it may make some sense to consult with an any attorney who can help advise them on the status of their DUI and whether it's going to be an impediment to them getting a license. As a general matter, as we were emphasizing, you don't need a lawyer, you don't need a notario, you don't need anybody to help you with this process. However, I think in certain circumstances it may make sense to consult with an attorney if you've got some sort of criminal history, a DUI, or even other forms of criminal history. If you have past immigration history, I think it might make sense, like a prior deportation, it may make sense to consult with an immigration attorney to see if applying for the driver's license may bring you to the attention of immigration authorities.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, you know, the AB 60 legislation was really meant for making certain that people who were driving on the streets of California had the legal ability to drive for insurance purposes, for identification purposes, just to secure a way of making certain that these individuals who have to take their kids to school, who have to go to work, have the ability to do so legally. Is there something in the AB 60 legislation and the law that allows the DMV to, whatever information the individual writes on that application, to give that information to ICE so that ICE can now have statistics over that individual who has applied? Is there something like that? Or should people, I don't want to put fear in our community, but I certainly want to make certain that our community is informed.
Yeah, this is a really important point. So in AB 60, there are strict confidentiality provisions that say when you submit an application, the DMV and California State will keep that information confidential. That is, they're not going to go out and share it with the federal government affirmatively. They're not going to go out and share it or anybody else. That information is meant to be kept confidential. However, the DMV maintains certain electronic databases that have information about people, including their current address. And the federal government has access to that information. So let's say somebody is an enforcement priority for ICE. Let's say they've got a recent deportation order that they've come back, or they have a significant criminal history that makes them fall within ICE's enforcement priorities. ICE can go into the DMV's database, look at that information to find their most recent address. And so that's why I think it's important that if you have some of the characteristics that may make you an enforcement priority for ICE, like criminal history, like a recent deportation, that you consult with an attorney before you apply for the AB 60 license, because there may be some risks, some collateral consequences for your immigration status or the ability of ICE to come after you as a result of your immigration status.
This is a very important point. So what we're saying, or what I'm hearing you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that a prior deportation may not make you ineligible to apply for the AB 60 license. However, in doing so, you now may face other risks not associated with the getting a driver's license, but now you may put yourself in a position where ICE can now figure out that you're back in the United States. So excellent point, and I want to drive that point a little further by explaining what you just said in Spanish for our Spanish community viewers. So lo que dijo el abogado es lo siguiente, que la ley de esta nueva licencia dice que no tiene, el DMV no tiene que dar la información a ICE, okay? No tiene que dar, todo es confidencial. Pero si aplicas y tienes un orden de deportación o tienes una historia criminal muy extensiva, es muy posible que ahora ICE, como tiene acceso al sistema del DMV, que ellos pueden obtener esa información de usted, y eso puede tener consecuencias. So, siempre si tienes una historia criminal que es extensivo, o tienes una historia inmigratoria con deportaciones, que es mejor que hablas con un abogado que está licenciado en el estado de California o que está licenciado y que puede representarte en los cortes inmigratorios, para ver si aplicando por esta nueva licencia te puede afectar. So, eso muy buen consejo, y eso es algo que ustedes tienen que saber sobre eso. And I think it's true in any type of application when you apply for DAPA, the new initiative that the president announced, or the renewal of DACA, or even if you're a first-time DACA applicant. Whatever information you're indicating to the government, while it is confidential, if there's something that is there that could alert ICE, that is still a risk that you take.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, and I want to emphasize something you said earlier too, which is we don't want to spread fear unnecessarily.
Correct.
For a lot of people, the AB60 license is something they can and should take advantage of without any fear whatsoever of any consequences from immigration authorities. But for this limited subset of people, there is a risk. We don't know how big it is, but it's something we're going to be monitoring. And we encourage people in those circumstances, it might make sense just to consult with an attorney, think about what those risks are, and if it makes sense for you to take them on. We also want to hear if people think that ICE may have found out about them because as a result of them getting an AB60 license or having to submit an application, whatever it may be. We want to know carefully what the federal government is doing here. We've repeatedly requested that ICE not rely on that information. We're going to continue to advocate for that, but we want to know in the interim until we can hopefully win that guarantee from ICE what's going on the ground, so we can stay on top of this and continue to work.
Well, I certainly will be alerting ACLU if I see any indication that ICE is using the information on AB60 applications.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say, en lo que dijo el abogado, es que no se asustan. Las personas que pueden ser afectados, muy limitado. Pero por mucha gente, este va a ser una manera de sacar una licencia y dejarte de manejar aquí en el estado de California legalmente. So, no tienen miedo, pero si tienen antecedentes criminales, una historia criminal que es muy extensivo o una historia inmigratoria muy extensivo, hablan con un abogado. Michael, I want to thank you so much for coming on to my show. I could go on, and we can discuss this even further. But if people out there want to get a hold of the ACLU and let them know, hey, this happened to me, or we're seeing this practice on a regular basis, how can they get a hold of you or a member of your organization?
Well, I want to encourage people, if they have questions about AB60, the process, eligibility, they want help, educational materials, whatever it may be. The ACLU is part of this coalition called Drive California, and the website is www.driveca.org. And there's a wealth of materials on there to help people prepare for the licenses in English and in Spanish, and I believe other languages as well, to help them figure out how to apply, how to study, and how to pass and get the license. And I encourage people to go there both to study up and also if they're having any difficulties to report them on that website. The ACLU, we have a separate website. In Los Angeles, it's www.aclusocal.org. And if you're having any issues with the police, immigration authorities, you've been discriminated against, abused, whatever it may be, please let us know. You can contact us through that website.
Thank you again, Michael, for being on my show and discussing AB60, a very important legislation that was passed by efforts like from the ACLU and others. So if anyone has any questions in regards to the issues we discussed and you want to discuss them further, or you want to report any incidents, please feel free to contact Michael Kaufman or the ACLU. Michael works for the ACLU. He's one of their most brilliant attorneys. Or you can contact me at patricia.m.corrales@gmail.com, or feel free to contact me at my office, which is 626-791-1434. Thank you for joining us today, and I wish all of you a wonderful holiday season.